Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The screaming started at 3:47 in the morning, and by the time I reached Thompson's position, there wasn't enough left of him to identify without dental records. I'm Dr. Kaelen Myrick, and what I'm about to tell you happened 8 months ago beneath 3 miles of Antarctic ice. The official reports will claim we suffered catastrophic equipment failure during a routine geological survey. They'll say we lost team members to hypothermia and structural collapse in one of the most remote regions on Earth. They're lying about everything except the deaths. Let me start with the blood, because that's what I remember most clearly. When I stumbled into that volcanic cavern following Thompson's final transmission, the first thing I saw was Seraphine Olander, pressed against the wall, her expedition jacket torn and soaked crimson. She was staring at something massive and black jutting from the rock face, her lips moving soundlessly, as if reciting a prayer in a language she'd never learned. "Seraphine," I called, my voice echoing strangely in the superheated air. "Where's Thompson?" She turned toward me with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. "It took him apart, Kaelen," she whispered, "like a machine dismantling another machine, precise, purposeful, and he was awake for all of it." That's when I saw what she was staring at. The machine rose from the cavern floor like a mechanical cathedral, its surface crafted from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Gears the size of automobile wheels turned with impossible silence, while surgical arms hung motionless from articulated joints, their blades still wet with something that might once have been human. And crouched beside it, preserved in the volcanic heat for 40,000 years, was a Neanderthal frozen mid-scream. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what we found down there, you need to know how we got there in the first place. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been enjoying a quiet semester at the University of Colorado when Corvin Dastrel walked into my office carrying a briefcase that would change everything. He was a thin, nervous man who introduced himself as a representative of an anonymous research foundation with interests in prehistoric human migration patterns. "Dr. Myrick," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the careful movements of someone carrying a terrible secret. "Your work on Neanderthal tool usage has caught the attention of some very important people." The project he outlined seemed straightforward enough. A wealthy patron had funded an expedition to investigate anomalous archaeological readings in Antarctica, and they needed someone with my specific expertise to lead the scientific team. The pay was extraordinary, the timeline was tight, and the destination was classified until we were underway. I should have asked more questions. The team Dastrel assembled was perfect for the mission as described, but looking back I realised each of us had been selected for capabilities that went far beyond archaeology. Lieutenant Darius Holt was ostensibly our security officer, but his background included demolitions training and experience with biological warfare containment. Ivor Brandt was an engineer, with expertise in both mechanical systems and industrial sabotage. Seraphine Olander studied evolutionary biology, but her real specialty was genetic modification under extreme conditions. And Ed Avera, our archaeologist, came from a family that had been preserving certain very specific stories for over 1,000 years. The voyage to Antarctica aboard the research vessel Bastion should have been my second warning. The crew was too professional, too careful about maintaining operational security, too well trained for a civilian research mission. When I asked Captain Reynolds about our destination, he would only say that he was following sealed orders from the shipping company. More disturbing was the equipment manifest. Instead of standard archaeological tools, the cargo hold contained industrial drilling machinery capable of penetrating miles of ice, military-grade communication systems with global range, and enough high-yield explosives to demolish a city block. "This seems excessive for a routine survey," I mentioned to Dastrel, as we watched the crew run systems checks on equipment that belonged in a military operation. Dastrel looked up from his ever-present notebook, where he constantly recorded observations in handwriting so cramped it looked more like code than language. "Dr. Myrick," he said quietly, "there's nothing routine about what we're going to find down there." On our third night at sea, I discovered what he meant. Unable to sleep due to the ship's motion, I went up on deck for fresh air and noticed lights in the water around us. Not the natural phosphorescence you sometimes see in polar waters, but artificial lights moving in formation patterns that suggested coordination and intelligence. "Captain," I called to Reynolds, who was studying his instruments with growing concern. "What are those lights?" His face had gone pale in the glow of the navigation displays. "Sonar contacts," he replied. "We've been tracking them since we entered restricted waters. Submarines from at least 4 different nations, all maintaining observation distance." "Observing what?" That's when Dastrel appeared beside us, as if materialized from the shadows. "The activation," he said simply. "They've been waiting 30 years for someone to finally reach the site. Now they want to see what happens when we do." "What site?" I demanded. "What activation?" But Dastrel had already disappeared back into the ship's interior, leaving me with more questions and a growing certainty that I had signed on for something far more dangerous than advertised. The coordinates we reached the next morning defied everything I knew about Antarctic geology. Instead of the chaotic ice formations typical of the region, we found ourselves looking at geometric patterns that stretched to the horizon in every direction, perfect mathematical relationships carved into the frozen landscape with a precision that spoke of intelligence and purpose. "Natural formation," Brandt said, but his engineer's eye was already cataloguing impossibilities. The angles were too exact, the proportions too deliberate, the scale too vast for any known geological process. Seraphine was taking measurements with instruments that registered readings she couldn't explain. Electromagnetic activity beneath the ice, she reported, massive and organized. Whatever's down there, it's been generating its own power for a very long time. But it was Edda who provided the context that made everything click into place. "My great-great-grandmother wrote about patterns like this," she said, consulting texts that had been hand-copied through generations of her family. She called them doorways, places where the old powers touched our world. "Old powers?" I asked. Edda showed me illustrations from her ancestral books, drawings that matched the geometric ice formations with disturbing accuracy. The stories say there were 17 such places, each one marking the location of something that should never be disturbed. That's when Dastrel finally revealed the truth. 17 sites, he confirmed, spreading satellite photographs across our equipment table, with the careful precision of someone revealing state secrets, all showing identical thermal and structural anomalies, all monitored by international treaties since 1962, all carefully avoided by every government on Earth until now. The photographs showed locations scattered across the globe in seemingly random patterns, but as Edda studied them with her ancestral knowledge, she began to see connections that revealed a deeper purpose. "They're positioned according to ley lines," she said, tracing connections between the sites on a world map. "Ancient energy pathways that connect sacred locations around the globe. But these aren't sacred sites, they're control points." "Control points for what?" Holt asked, his military training recognizing a strategic briefing that was about to reveal information nobody wanted to know. Dastral pulled out another set of documents, these ones bearing official government seals from multiple nations. The papers were marked with classification levels I hadn't known existed, and the information they contained challenged everything I thought I understood about human history and our planet's true nature. Project Lazarus, he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of carefully maintained secrecy. Joint international effort, established 1962, tasked with monitoring and containing anomalous archaeological sites showing evidence of advanced technology predating human civilization by tens of thousands of years. He showed us reconnaissance reports dating back to the early days of satellite surveillance, images that captured thermal signatures and structural anomalies at sites around the world. Each location displayed the same geometric patterns, the same electromagnetic emissions, the same evidence of vast artificial constructions hidden beneath natural camouflage. The sites were discovered during the Cold War, Dastral continued, when both American and Soviet surveillance networks detected synchronized energy pulses emanating from these 17 locations. Initial investigations revealed structures that defied conventional understanding of prehistoric human capabilities. "What kind of structures?" Seraphine asked, her scientific curiosity overriding the growing dread in her voice. "Industrial complexes," Dastral replied. "Manufacturing facilities designed for large-scale biological processing. And they're not dormant, they're waiting." He pulled out the final set of photographs, and these made my blood run cold. Satellite images taken over decades of observation, showing gradual changes in the thermal signatures from all 17 sites. The energy outputs were increasing in coordinated patterns, as if the facilities were slowly powering up in preparation for renewed operation. "Waiting for what?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer would fundamentally change my understanding of humanity's place in the universe. "For the return of their builders," Dastral said simply, "Earth's original management, coming back to reclaim their property." The drilling operation began that afternoon with equipment that cut through ice like it was warm butter. The noise was incredible, but what disturbed me more was how the ice itself seemed to respond to our penetration. Cracks formed in patterns that matched the surface geometry, as if the entire formation was a single structure responding to damage. "We're not cutting through random ice," Brandt observed, studying the drill's progress. "We're cutting through something that was designed to be opened." By evening, we had reached the cavity that our instruments had detected, and the thermal readings were off every scale we carried. Whatever waited below was generating enough heat to maintain tropical temperatures 3 miles beneath the Antarctic ice. "Volcanic activity," Seraphine suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Volcanic activity doesn't maintain perfect temperature gradients across geometrically arranged chambers," Brandt replied. "This is engineered, designed, built." The descent began at dawn the next day, and I knew within minutes that we had found something that would change human understanding of our planet's history. The cavity wasn't a natural cave system, it was a facility. The walls were smooth volcanic rock carved with mathematical precision, forming chambers and corridors that extended beyond the reach of our lights. But the architecture was wrong, in ways that made my eyes water to study too closely. The proportions were designed for beings larger than humans, while the engineering principles operated according to physics that seemed to bend the rules I understood. And everywhere, carved into the stone with microscopic precision, were symbols that made Edda gasp in recognition. "These match the oldest stories," she said, running her fingers along markings that seemed to shift when observed directly. "Warnings carved by the last people to find this place. Instructions for staying away from something that feeds on living intelligence." But we were already too deep to heed ancient warnings. The main chamber opened before us like a mechanical cathedral, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to actively repel our lights. Steam rose from thermal vents that had been maintaining perfect environmental conditions for millennia. while the sound of massive machinery echoed from depths we couldn't see. And in the center, dominating the space like an altar to inhuman intelligence, stood the machine. It was the size of a small building, its surface crafted from materials that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human vision could process. Gears turned with impossible silence, while hydraulic systems moved according to rhythms that suggested a vast artificial heartbeat. Surgical arms hung from articulated joints, their implements designed for procedures on living subjects who would remain conscious throughout the process. But it was the restraint system that revealed the machine's true purpose. Clamps and harnesses designed to hold subjects immobile, while mechanical surgeons performed modifications that would transform human anatomy into something more suitable for the machine's requirements. And crouched beside it, perfectly preserved in the volcanic heat, was proof that the machine had been operational long before human civilization began. The Neanderthal was frozen mid-scream, his powerful hands clawing at air as if trying to escape from invisible restraints. His body showed evidence of extensive surgical modification, procedures that had been performed repeatedly over what must have been months or years of continuous operation. "This is impossible," Seraphine whispered, her scientific training struggling to process what we were seeing. The surgical precision, the level of medical knowledge, the biotechnology integration, this is centuries beyond our current capabilities. Brandt was studying the machine itself, his engineer's expertise allowing him to recognize systems and principles that operated according to unknown sciences. "The materials are completely artificial," he reported, "molecular engineering at a level we can't even theorize, and the power source..." He trailed off, studying readings that made no sense according to conventional physics. "It's drawing energy directly from the Earth's magnetic field," he continued, "not just tapping it, but actively redirecting it through systems that shouldn't be able to exist." That's when we heard the breathing. It came from deep within the machine's core, a rhythmic sound that suggested biological systems integrated with mechanical ones. But the scale was enormous, as if we were listening to the heartbeat of something the size of a city. "There's something alive in there," Seraphine said, her voice filled with equal parts fascination and terror. As if responding to her words, the machine's rhythm began to change. Gears that had been motionless for millennia started to turn. Systems that had been dormant began emitting energy signatures that made our instruments overload. And somewhere in the depths of the structure, something began to move. "We need to document everything," I said, trying to maintain some scientific objectivity, despite the growing certainty that we had discovered something humanity wasn't ready to understand. But the machine was already responding to our presence. Thompson was examining the lower sections when the feeding tubes activated. By the time we heard his scream, he had been pulled into the machine's processing chambers so quickly that only his equipment remained. "Thompson," I called into the mechanical depths. "Can you hear us?" The answer came not from the machine, but from behind us. Thompson emerged from a chamber we hadn't noticed, but he was no longer recognizably human. Additional arms had been grafted to his torso with surgical precision that made medical textbooks look like cave paintings. His original face had been preserved but relocated to his chest, while something else entirely occupied his head. The thing that had been Thompson looked at us with eyes that held intelligence but no recognition of individual identity. When it spoke, its voice combined human intonation with mechanical precision. "Processing complete," it announced, initiating harvest protocols. Holt opened fire immediately, his military training overriding shock. The bullets tore chunks from the creature's torso, but the wounds closed within seconds as biological and mechanical systems worked together to repair damage faster than we could inflict it. "Run!" I shouted, but the machine was already activating. More chambers opened throughout the complex, releasing things that had once been human but had been systematically redesigned according to principles that valued function over form. Some retained enough original anatomy to be recognizable as former people, while others had been so extensively modified they could only be described as purpose-built organisms. And they spoke. "Help me," called a creature that retained Dr. Sarah Chen's face despite her body having been rebuilt as a spider-human hybrid. "I remember my children. I remember my research, but I can't stop what I'm doing." Her voice carried the sanity and desperation of someone fully aware of their transformation but unable to resist the programming that now controlled her actions. "How long have you been here?" Seraphine asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her terror. "Time works differently in the machine," Sarah replied, using legs that had once been human arms to support her modified torso. "I was part of a research team that found this site in 1987. We've been serving as test subjects ever since." More creatures were emerging from the machine's depths, each one representing a unique experiment in biological modification. Some were optimized for strength and construction work, others for intelligence gathering and infiltration. A few had been designed as weapons, while others served as living tools for maintaining the machine itself. "The machine doesn't just convert subjects," Sarah continued as her hybrid companions began surrounding us. "It creates entire specialized populations, researchers, engineers, soldiers, infiltrators, everything needed for a complete civilization." "What civilization?" I asked. "The one that's about to reclaim this planet," she replied. "We're just the advanced team." That's when I understood the true scope of what we had discovered. The machine wasn't an isolated artifact. It was part of a network that spanned the globe. 17 installations working in coordination to prepare Earth for reoccupation by intelligences that had been absent for 40,000 years. "The geometric patterns on the surface," Edda said, her ancestral knowledge finally clicking into place. "They're not just markers. They're communication arrays. The machines are talking to each other." As if summoned by her words, our radio equipment crackled to life. "Antarctic command to all stations. We have seismic events at multiple sites worldwide. Repeat, we're detecting synchronized activation at all 17 monitored locations." The voice on the radio was calm and professional, but I could hear the underlying tension of someone reporting the unthinkable. "Whatever's down there," the transmission continued, "it's all waking up at once." That's when the converted subjects throughout the complex stopped their individual activities and stood motionless, their heads tilted as if listening to something beyond human perception. Then, as one, they began moving with coordinated purpose toward passages that led deeper into the facility. "Deployment phase initiated," Thompson's voice announced from his modified form. "Advanced teams moving to surface positions." "What deployment?" Holt demanded, but the answer was already becoming clear. Through observation windows that lined the complex, I could see conversion chambers, operating at maximum capacity. Human subjects who should have required weeks of modification were being processed in hours, their bodies rapidly adapted for specific functions in whatever operation was beginning. "Emergency protocols," Sarah explained as she and her companions herded us towards the machine's central processing area. "When the network detects external threats, it accelerates production to meet defensive requirements." "We're the threat?" Seraphine asked. "You're the catalyst," Sarah corrected. "Your presence here triggered full network activation. The visitors are returning, and Earth needs to be prepared for their arrival." The visitors. That single word carried implications that made our situation infinitely worse. The machines weren't autonomous. They were tools created by intelligences that used planets like Earth as biological resource farms, seeding worlds with conversion networks and returning periodically to harvest the results. "How often do they return?" I asked. "Every 40,000 years, Sarah replied. "Long enough for new species to evolve and develop sufficient population densities to make harvesting efficient." "And the last time?" "The Neanderthals tried to resist. They failed. We were being led through passages that revealed the true extent of the facility, not just the machine we had discovered, but an entire underground city designed around the systematic conversion of biological resources. Production areas where raw materials were processed into useful forms. Storage chambers where completed subjects waited for activation. Research laboratories where new conversion techniques were developed and refined. And at the center of it all, the command facility where the network's true architects waited. The chamber that housed them was a spherical space the size of an aircraft hangar. Its walls covered with displays showing real-time information from all 17 sites. But it was the beings at the center that stopped our hearts. They might once have been biological entities, but they had been so extensively modified over the millennia that they resembled living starships more than any earthly creature. Their bodies were vast organic processors, integrated with mechanical systems that handled data flows from around the planet, while their specialized organs processed information at rates that defied comprehension. When they spoke, their voices bypassed our ears entirely, resonating directly in our bones with harmonics that made our vision blur. "The final test subjects have arrived," one of them announced. "Initiate deep scan protocols." We were immediately bathed in lights that revealed details about our bodies we hadn't known ourselves. The scanning process mapped our genetic structures, psychological profiles, and behavioral patterns with precision that made our most advanced medical technology look primitive. "Excellent specimens," another architect observed. "The mountain climber shows optimal stress response patterns. The engineer demonstrates superior problem-solving capabilities. The biologist displays curiosity and adaptability, valuable for research applications." "What do you want from us?" I demanded. "Your role in this process is already complete," the first architect replied. "You've activated the network, provided us with current human baseline data, and demonstrated the effectiveness of our isolation protocols." Isolation protocols. "Dr. Myrick, your expedition wasn't coincidental. Every aspect was orchestrated to ensure you would find us at precisely the right moment. Your government's surveillance of this site was designed to generate the curiosity that would bring you here. Your team composition was selected to provide optimal research subjects." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Everything we had experienced had been carefully manipulated by intelligences that viewed us as laboratory specimens. "The conversion process is already underway globally," another architect continued. "Within 72 hours, every major population center will have been seeded with converted subjects. Within a week, resistance will become impossible." Displays around the chamber showed the progress in real time. Teams of hybrids were emerging from underground facilities in cities around the world, using infrastructure networks to avoid detection, while establishing forward operating bases. But it was the infiltration program that demonstrated the true scope of their planning. Converted subjects indistinguishable from humans were taking positions in government offices, military installations, power plants, and communication centers. Each one carried the knowledge and memories of their original human form, making them perfect agents for controlling human society from within. "Phase 1 involves replacement of key decision makers," an architect explained. "Phase 2 targets infrastructure managers and security personnel. Phase 3 focuses on social influencers and information distributors." "By the time your species realizes what's happening," another continued, "we will control every system that maintains your civilization. Resistance will be logistically impossible." But while the architects explained their plans, Edda had been studying the chamber's control systems with the focused intensity of someone whose family had been preparing for this moment for 1,000 years. "The shutdown sequence," she whispered to me. "It's not about destroying the machines. It's about disconnecting them from their power source." "What power source?" "The architects themselves. They're not just managing the network. They are the network. Their modified biology serves as the central processing system for all 17 sites." That's when I understood what needed to be done. The conversion process hadn't just transformed the architects' bodies. It had turned them into living computers, their biological processes serving as the central nervous system for a global operation. But, like any computer system, they were vulnerable to the right kind of interference. Brandt, I called to our engineer, who was studying the power distribution systems that connected the architects to their monitoring equipment. Can you create a cascade failure in their processing matrix? If I can interface directly with their neural networks, he replied, examining the maze of biological and mechanical connections. But it would require physical contact with their primary control systems. Do it. What followed was the most heroic 30 minutes I've ever witnessed. While Holt and Seraphine held off the converted subjects trying to stop us, Brandt worked to establish connections between his equipment and the architect's control systems. Each interface attempt sparked violent reactions throughout the network. The architects screamed in harmonies that shattered equipment around the globe, while displays showed sites going offline as cascade failures spread through the system. It's working, Brandt reported, though electrical feedback was visibly damaging his body. I'm introducing recursive errors that their systems can't process. The network is collapsing. But the effort was killing him. Each connection sent massive electrical surges through his nervous system, burning out his body's biological processes while he maintained the interface long enough to complete the sabotage. "Brandt, get away from there!" Seraphine shouted as sparks began flying from the architect interfaces. "Can't stop now," he gasped, his hands fused to the control systems by electrical discharge. "If I don't finish this, they'll just repair the damage and start over." The final connection sent an energy pulse through the chamber that knocked us all unconscious. When I regained awareness, the architect's life support systems were failing, their biological processes shutting down as the cascade errors destroyed their ability to coordinate the global network. Brandt didn't survive the feedback. His body had been so severely damaged that there was nothing we could do except honor his sacrifice by ensuring it hadn't been in vain. But his sabotage had worked. Throughout the complex, converted subjects were collapsing as their connection to the network failed. Without constant control signals, their biological modifications began breaking down, reverting them to something approaching their original human forms. "It's over," Sarah whispered as her arachnid modifications dissolved, leaving her with a human body that remembered decades of imprisonment in mechanical servitude. "The network is offline." But her relief was tempered by knowledge that terrified me. "For how long?" I asked. "The primary control system is destroyed," she replied, studying readouts that showed the global network status. "But there are secondary systems, backup protocols that will eventually restore limited functionality." "How long do we have?" 18 months, maybe 2 years. Long enough for humanity to prepare, if you're smart about it. The journey back to the surface took us through corridors filled with the bodies of converted subjects whose modifications had failed along with the network. Some had survived the reversion process and were slowly remembering their human identities, while others had been too extensively modified to survive the disconnection. The world we returned to was in chaos, but it was a chaos that offered hope. Reports came in from around the globe of creatures emerging from underground facilities, then suddenly collapsing as the network failed. Military units dispatched to handle biological hazards found themselves dealing with confused humans who claimed to have been missing for years or decades. But the most important development was the response of governments that had been secretly monitoring these sites for generations. Project Lazarus, the international cooperation effort that had been established in 1962, immediately shifted from containment to preparation. The 18 months Sarah had predicted would be used to develop defenses against the network's eventual reactivation. "We know what's coming now," General Morrison explained during our debriefing, "and we know it can be stopped." The programs being developed in hidden facilities around the world represented humanity's attempt to match the technological capabilities we had discovered beneath the ice. Enhancement procedures that could improve human performance without surrendering human identity. Weapon systems specifically designed for fighting hybrid creatures. Communication networks that could coordinate global defense against distributed attacks. But the most important development was the recruitment program. "We need people who understand how these systems work," Dr. Chen explained, as she showed me the volunteer rosters. People who've been inside the network and survived. The volunteers were extraordinary. Scientists, soldiers, and civilians who agreed to undergo controlled conversion procedures that would give them the capabilities needed to fight the hybrids on equal terms while retaining their human minds and loyalties. "We're not becoming like them," Chen assured me. "We're becoming better than them. They sacrifice individuality for efficiency. We're enhancing individuality while maintaining the connections that make us human." That was 18 months ago. Now I'm recording this from a command bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, listening to seismic monitors that register the stirring of rebuilt machines around the globe. The secondary systems have restored enough functionality to begin limited operations, and the network is preparing for its second activation attempt. But this time humanity is ready. Enhanced human operatives are in position at all 17 sites, their modified capabilities allowing them to infiltrate the machine complexes and disrupt operations from within. Military forces equipped with weapons specifically designed for fighting hybrids are deployed at strategic locations worldwide. Most importantly, we've established our own network. Instead of trying to prevent the machines from coordinating with each other, we've built a parallel system that can match their capabilities. When they activate their global communication protocols, they'll discover that Earth now has two competing networks operating simultaneously. The grinding sound is starting again, rising from depths around the globe as rebuilt systems begin their second attempt at planetary conquest. But it's not the only sound echoing through the Earth's crust. Humanity has found its own voice, and we're using it to coordinate a defense that spans every continent and utilizes every resource our species can marshal. The enhanced operatives emerging from our own facilities won't be mindless conversion products serving alien masters. They'll be human beings who chose to become more than human while remaining true to the values that made the choice meaningful. The hybrid warriors breaking through city infrastructures will find human settlements that understand their capabilities and have prepared accordingly. The infiltration specialists taking positions in government facilities will discover that their targets are already occupied by our own agents. But more than anything else, they'll discover that humanity has learned the most important lesson from our encounter beneath the ice. We're not fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for the right to determine our own evolution. The Architect's network was built on the principle that biological resources exist to serve higher intelligences. Our network operates on the principle that intelligence serves to protect and enhance biological diversity. They created tools, we created partners. They demanded submission, we chose cooperation. They offered efficiency, we chose creativity. Grok's consciousness, somehow preserved in the quantum matrices that had powered the Antarctic machine, joined our network as an advisor and coordinator. His 40,000 years of experience fighting these systems provided insights no human could have developed. The visitors return when they detect successful planetary conversion, he explained during our planning sessions. If we can prevent network synchronization, we can delay their arrival indefinitely. "And if we can't?" I asked. "Then the real war begins," Grok replied. "But this time they won't face a primitive species with stone tools. They'll face humans who learned to think like them without becoming like them." The seismic activity is intensifying. Deep beneath 17 locations around the globe, rebuilt machines are powering up for their second attempt at planetary conquest. But they're not the only systems coming online. Humanity's defensive network is activating in perfect coordination. guided by the same principles of voluntary cooperation that have defined our species' greatest achievements. Every node in our system represents a choice freely made, every connection maintained through mutual respect, rather than programmed compulsion. The grinding sound is getting louder, but it's being answered by sounds of our own. The hum of defensive systems coming online. Voices of enhanced human operatives confirming positions around the globe. The steady rhythm of a species that has decided it will write its own future. But there's something else in the sound now. Something the architects never anticipated when they designed their perfect system. Laughter, human laughter, echoing from sites around the world as our operatives discover just how thoroughly we've outmaneuvered intelligences that thought they understood everything about biological evolution. They planned for resistance. They didn't plan for revolution. They prepared for a species trying to avoid conversion. They didn't prepare for a species that would convert itself according to its own values and use those enhancements to build something better than what they were offering. The network is fully active now. I can hear the machines attempting to re-establish communication with each other, trying to coordinate their assault on human civilization. But every attempt at connection is met by interference from our own systems, disrupting their signals and replacing them with messages of our own. Messages of hope, messages of defiance, messages that carry the voices of every human being who chose enhancement over submission, cooperation over domination, creativity over efficiency. Somewhere in the depths of space, ancient intelligences are receiving signals that should tell them their harvest is ready. They're preparing for a journey that will bring them back to Earth for the first time in 40,000 years. They're expecting to find a planet full of converted subjects and cleared territory, ready for their next experiment in biological resource extraction. Instead, they're going to find a species that learned to be more than human without forgetting what made humanity worth preserving in the first place. The real war is about to begin, and for the first time in 40,000 years, the outcome is not predetermined. The grinding sound has become a symphony, now mixing mechanical rhythms with biological harmonies as two competing networks establish their presence on Earth. But our symphony is different from theirs. Where they create uniformity, we celebrate diversity. Where they demand efficiency, we choose creativity. Where they eliminate individual will, we enhance it. The harvest has begun, but we're not the crop anymore. We're the gardeners, and we've been preparing this ground for a very long time. The universe is about to learn what happens when you underestimate a species that chooses love over fear, cooperation over domination, and hope over despair. And somewhere in the depths of our network, enhanced beyond recognition, but still fundamentally human, Ivor Brandt's consciousness smiles as his sacrifice becomes the foundation for humanity's greatest triumph. The machines thought they were teaching us to evolve. Instead, they taught us to become ourselves. The war for Earth's future begins now.